It was February 12th, 1982. A thin layer of ice coated the narrow roads that wound through Laurel County, Kentucky. The last of the winter wind drifted across the open fields, carrying with it the quiet hum of a town settling in for the night. Inside the small sheriff's office on Main Street, Deputy Alan Burke rubbed his hands together over a space heater, glancing at the clock. 11:47 p.m. His shift was nearly over when the call came through. Control to Unit 12. We've got a possible vehicle abandoned on Route 17, just past the Old Mill Road. Burke sighed, grabbed his hat, and muttered to his partner, probably just another stalled truck. But 20 minutes later, standing beside a red 1979 Ford Fairmont, dusted in frost, he realized this wasn't routine. The driver's door hung open. The headlights still glowed faintly, and a woman's purse lay scattered on the gravel shoulder. A set of footprints led toward the tree line, and then simply stopped. "Control," Burke said quietly into his radio. "We're going to need backup." That night would mark the last time anyone saw 22-year-old Laura Jennings, a nursing student from London, Kentucky. By morning, the missing persons report spread fast. Laura had been working a late shift at a roadside diner before heading home. Her manager confirmed she clocked out at 10:43 p.m., tired but in good spirits. She never made it home. Her parents, Harold and Susan Jennings, called every friend, every hospital, every station. Nothing. Within 2 days, local volunteers formed search parties, combing through the frozen woods, but snow had already covered the tracks. The investigation moved quickly at first. Detectives found Laura's necklace caught on a branch near the tree line, but no blood, no clothing, no struggle, just silence. Then came the eyewitness claims. A truck idling by the roadside, a man smoking near the bridge, headlights slashing twice. Every lead collapsed under scrutiny. By March, the posters began to curl on the edges. Missing Laura Jennings, age 22. The town of London began to whisper. At first, suspicion fell on Tommy Granger, Laura's boyfriend. They had argued that night about her plans to move to Lexington for school. He claimed he went home afterward, and his parents backed his story. Investigators found nothing connecting him to the scene. Weeks turned into months. Without evidence, the case went cold. But for the Jennings family, time didn't move forward. It looped endlessly around that February night. Harold Jennings retired early from the hardware store, spending his days driving the same backroads where his daughter vanished. Susan kept her room untouched. The floral wallpaper, the open textbooks, the unfinished quilt folded neatly at the end of the bed. In 1982, forensic science in rural Kentucky meant fingerprints, photographs, and faith. The few pieces of evidence collected were sealed in manila envelopes and stored in a metal cabinet at the sheriff's office. Over the years, new sheriffs came and went, each promising to reopen the case, each eventually admitting defeat. Then came 2019. Detective Rachel Turner, newly transferred from Louisville's Homicide Division, stumbled upon the Jennings file while auditing cold cases. The binder was thick, over 300 pages, most handwritten, some faded to near illegibility. What caught her attention was a small envelope taped inside the back cover, labeled unprocessed material. Inside lay a piece of cloth and 2 untested cigarette butts recovered near the abandoned Fairmont. The case notes mentioned them only briefly, dismissed at the time as likely unrelated. Turner sent them for DNA analysis, not expecting much. 2 weeks later, the lab called. The cigarette butts contained male DNA, not from Laura or anyone in the original suspect pool. The database hit matched a man named Daniel Kearns, 63, currently living in western Tennessee. Kearns had a minor criminal history, trespassing, assault, but nothing that tied him to homicide. Still, when Turner dug deeper, a pattern began to form. Kearns had worked as a truck mechanic in the early 1980s for a transport company that operated out of London, Kentucky, the same one that serviced the diner Laura had worked at. He left town abruptly 3 months after her disappearance. Turner drove to Tennessee and requested a quiet interview. Kearns, gray-haired and soft-spoken, seemed calm, too calm. He said he remembered the case vaguely, claimed he used to eat at that diner, but insisted he didn't know the girl personally. When asked about 1982, he smiled faintly. "Long time ago, detective. You can't expect a man to remember every cold night on the road." Something in his tone unsettled her. Back in Kentucky, Turner compared old employment records. The company logs showed that on February 12, 1982, the night Laura vanished, Kearns had clocked out at 9:05 p.m., driving a service truck home along Route 17, the same route where her car was found. The breakthrough, though, came not from Kearns, but from a storage room behind the sheriff's office. While reviewing archived photos, Turner found a single Polaroid that had been misfiled. It showed the Ford Fairmont from another angle, its back door slightly ajar. Zooming in, she noticed a faint smear on the doorframe. It looked like dried mud, but when she requested a sample test, it came back as blood residue. The DNA was partial, degraded, but enough to confirm it belonged to Laura Jennings. The photo timestamp placed her outside the vehicle before the attacker pulled her toward the woods. The realization hit hard. She had fought back. Turner reopened the case publicly in June 2019. For Laurel County residents, it felt like a ghost had returned. The story made local news, then spread statewide. Journalists interviewed anyone who remembered the night. Old rumors resurfaced: the strange truck, the cigarette smell near the bridge, the unmarked footprints in the snow. When Turner presented the evidence to a grand jury, they issued a warrant for Kearns' arrest. He was taken into custody quietly, without resistance. When asked about Laura Jennings, he maintained the same line: "Don't remember her." But the DNA said otherwise. Inside Kearns' garage, investigators found a small box of memorabilia, old photos, trinkets, and beneath them, a tarnished gold earring. Laura's mother identified it immediately from a high school portrait. It was the one she'd worn every day until she disappeared. The revelation sent shockwaves through Laurel County. For decades, people had believed Laura's case would never be solved. Now the truth stood in plain sight, 40 years later. Turner addressed the press briefly. "This is not just a case closed. This is a family's 40-year nightmare ending." But what no one knew then was that this discovery would open something darker. Because once investigators started digging into Daniel Kearns' past, they realized Laura Jennings may not have been his only victim. The arrest of Daniel Kearns hit Laurel County like thunder on a clear day. After 40 years of whispers, the silence finally broke, and every corner of town echoed with it. Detective Rachel Turner stood outside the county jail that morning, notebook in hand, frost still clinging to her jacket. She'd expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt unease, because the deeper she looked, the more the timeline frayed. Inside the interrogation room, Kearns sat across from her. Wrists cuffed loosely, expression unreadable. His eyes were the pale gray of someone who's seen too much road and too little light. "You said you don't remember her," Turner began, sliding a photograph across the table. Laura Jennings smiling in her diner uniform. Kearns barely glanced at it. "Lot of faces in those days, detective. I fixed trucks. Folks came and went." Turner leaned in. "You left town 3 months after she vanished. Coincidence?" "You took a night route. The same evening, her car was found abandoned. Still coincidence." She studied his hands, scarred knuckles, fingernails, clean, a faint tremor. Guilt doesn't always confess in words. Sometimes it hides in the body. Forensics would soon fill in what Kearns refused to. His DNA matched the cigarette butts, the fibers in the Fairmont's back seat, and a single hair caught in the fabric of Laura's coat. Statistically, it was impossible for anyone else to fit that profile. But Turner wasn't satisfied with the how. She needed the why. Kern's work history placed him on dozens of routes across Kentucky and Tennessee in the early 1980s. As she cross-checked police archives, 2 more disappearances surfaced. Women reported missing along freight corridors, each within a few miles of a truck stop where Kearns had clocked fuel receipts. At the time, both cases had been written off as runaways. Now, the pattern looked deliberate. Turner spent nights in her office, surrounded by maps and faded photographs. Red pins marked Laura Jennings. Yellow pins marked the others. When connected, the lines formed a rough triangle around London, Kentucky, Kern's home base in 1982. She stared at it for a long time. He didn't just stop once, she whispered. He practiced. Meanwhile, in town, the Jennings family lived through a second kind of storm. The news coverage brought cameras, reporters, strangers stopping by the house with casseroles and condolences. Harold and Susan Jennings had grown old, waiting for answers. Now, in their 70s, they found themselves reliving every question. "I thought closure would feel peaceful," Harold told a local journalist. "Instead, it feels like grief learned a new trick." At the courthouse, crowds gathered for every pretrial hearing. Kearns rarely spoke, but when he did, it was only to request water or adjust his glasses. Turner watched him from the back row, noting how he avoided eye contact whenever Laura's photograph appeared on the projector. One afternoon, she received a call from a retired state trooper in neighboring Rockcastle County. He'd heard about the arrest and recognized the name. "We looked at that man once," he said. 1983, a hitchhiker gone missing off Route 25. Never proved anything. He offered to dig up his old notes. 2 days later, a dusty folder arrived by courier. Inside were Polaroids of a rest stop, tire impressions in gravel, and a partial license plate scribbled on the back of a napkin. KY4789L, Kern's registration number from Turner briefed the district attorney. "We're not dealing with a single homicide. We're closing a chapter of serial assaults that ran under our noses for a decade." He nodded grimly. "One case at a time, detective. Let's get justice for Laura first." As trial preparations began, Turner visited the Jennings home one last time. The walls were lined with family photos, birthdays frozen mid-laugh. On the mantel stood a candle, burned halfway down. Susan Jennings held out a box. "She kept her tips from the diner in here," she said softly. "We never opened it after she disappeared." Inside lay a few folded bills, a note scribbled on the back of a receipt. "Don't forget, my shift change Friday. Love, L." Turner's throat tightened. Even the smallest artifacts carried a kind of gravity. In January 2020, the trial began. The courtroom overflowed. Locals who'd been children during Laura's disappearance now brought their own kids, saying, "This is what truth looks like when it finally shows up." The prosecution's narrative was simple and devastating. They detailed how Kearns had offered Laura a ride after her car broke down, then attacked her near the bridge, hiding her body off an access road later flooded by spring rains. Modern cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar had located bone fragments matching her dental records beneath layers of sediment, 30 yards from where her necklace was found. Kearns' defense tried to argue contamination, time decay, faulty memory, but DNA didn't forget. When the forensic pathologist described the injuries, Susan Jennings turned away, clutching Harold's arm. Turner watched from the aisle, jaw set, pen unmoving. 40 years of silence compressed into each testimony like pressure in stone. During closing arguments, District Attorney Price stepped forward, his voice measured. 40 years, he said, is longer than some lifetimes, but justice doesn't keep a calendar. It keeps a promise. He pointed toward the photograph of Laura. She waited. Her family waited. Kentucky waited. Now, finally, it's our turn to speak for her. The jury deliberated less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Outside, rain fell steady, cold, familiar. the same kind of night Laura vanished. Reporters crowded around Turner as she left the courthouse. One asked, "Detective, do you believe this closes the book?" She paused before answering. "It closes a book," she said, "but not the story. There are pages still missing." Because even as Kearns was led away to serve a life sentence, Turner's new task force began cross-checking his old routes against unsolved files across 3 states. The hits kept coming. Small towns, missing women, same signature. It would take years to unravel, but Laurel County finally believed something it hadn't in decades, that persistence could outlive fear. At Laura Jennings' graveside service that spring, the wind moved through the pines with a soft sigh. Harold Jennings placed the diner note in the ground beside the marker. "You're clocked out now, baby," he whispered. The crowd stepped back. Turner lingered a moment longer, notebook closed, badge heavy on her chest. She'd spent months chasing ghosts through files and evidence rooms. But standing there, she realized the truth about cold cases. They never truly die. They wait for someone stubborn enough to listen. That night, as she drove back through the hills, snow beginning to fall again, the radio played static between stations. She turned it off, letting the silence fill the car. In that quiet, she could almost hear the echo of Laura's laughter, the sound of a story finally told. The courthouse had emptied weeks ago, but the story refused to settle. In Laurel County, people still lowered their voices when they said his name. Not because they feared him. Daniel Kearns would die behind bars, but because his crimes had left echoes in places they never expected. Detective Rachel Turner didn't attend the sentencing. She stayed in her car outside the jail, headlights off, listening to the rain. She thought about the cigarette butts, the Polaroid, the box of old trinkets that had turned rumor into proof. She thought about the 40 years between the scream that no one heard and the verdict that finally named it. Justice, she realized, was rarely loud. It arrived like weather, slow, inevitable, and cold. Inside the courtroom, Judge Elliot Banks spoke plainly. "For every unanswered question," he said, "there's a family who kept asking. This verdict belongs to them." Then he sentenced Kearns to 2 consecutive life terms. The old man didn't flinch. He only asked whether he could keep his Bible. The request was granted. He was led away, and the heavy door closed behind him with a sound like a final period. For the Jennings family, it wasn't an ending so much as an exhale. Harold Jennings walked out of the courthouse holding his wife's hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. Reporters waited, microphones ready, but he spoke just one line. "We waited 40 years. Tonight, we stop waiting." Then he guided Susan down the steps, through the cameras, into the gray drizzle of a Kentucky afternoon. The following month, the town held a candlelight vigil on the courthouse lawn. No speeches, no music, just silence and small flames trembling in the wind. Turner stood among them, her badge tucked in her coat pocket, anonymous in the crowd. When the candles were extinguished, she looked up and saw the courthouse clock. 8:43 p.m., the same time Laura Jennings' car had been found idling on Route 17. She felt the symmetry like a chill. Back at the sheriff's office, Turner packed the case file into an archival box marked Closed, 2020. Then she opened a new folder beside it, labeled Associated Roots. Because closure, she knew, was a privilege not every family received. There were more pins on her map, more names without endings. The Jennings case had proven what patience could accomplish. Now, she meant to use it again. Weeks later, the state released a joint statement confirming that evidence from 2 other cold cases matched Kearns' DNA profile. It was official. Laura Jennings hadn't been his only victim. Headlines across Kentucky read, "Serial predator identified after 4 decades." But beneath the noise, what people remembered was the image of an elderly couple standing in the rain, candles in hand, finally hearing the truth. Harold Jennings passed away quietly that fall. His obituary was small, just 20 lines in the Laurel County Herald. Detective Turner found out 2 days later and attended the service unannounced. Susan recognized her immediately. "You gave us back our daughter," she said, voice trembling. Turner shook her head. "No, ma'am. You kept her alive long enough for us to find her." They said nothing else, because sometimes silence carries more honesty than words. After the funeral, Turner drove back toward the bridge on Route 17. The guardrails were new, the asphalt smooth, but the air felt unchanged, still heavy with that winter memory. She parked near the spot where the Fairmont had once sat, engine humming, headlights burning into the dark. The woods were quiet, except for wind in the branches. She closed her eyes and pictured Laura walking out of the diner, coat buttoned, snow beginning to fall, a future still ahead of her. Then she whispered the line she used at every recovered scene. "You can rest now. We heard you." By spring 2021, the Jennings Foundation launched its first program, funding DNA testing for rural counties with unsolved cases older than 20 years. Turner helped design the training sessions. Her lectures were brief, half investigation, half sermon. "Evidence doesn't rot," she'd tell the rookies. "Only the will to look for it does." She spoke of small things, the cigarette butt, the Polaroid, the faith of a family that refused to stop calling. Each class ended the same way. Lights dimmed, projector off, a single slide reading, "Never cold, only waiting." The Foundation's first success came months later when a case in southern Ohio, dormant since 1991, produced a DNA hit thanks to their funding. National media credited the Jennings investigation for sparking a statewide push into long-term cold cases. Turner avoided the interviews, preferring to stay behind the scenes. Her measure of success wasn't headlines. It was the look on a family's face when a name replaced a question mark. As for Daniel Kearns, he lasted less than 2 years in prison. One morning, guards found him slumped on his bunk, the Bible open to the book of Amos. "Let justice roll down like waters." The state buried him in an unmarked grave. No visitors came. For a man who had hidden in plain sight, obscurity became his final sentence. When news of his death reached Laurel County, there was no celebration. Harold was gone, Susan too frail to attend the small gathering at the cemetery. Lucia Turner, Rachel's niece, and now the Foundation's media coordinator, filmed a short tribute for social media. In it, she said, "Justice doesn't end with punishment. It ends with understanding why we kept searching." The clip went viral within hours, shared under hashtags "Cold Case Solved" and "Justice After Years." YouTube's algorithm picked it up, feeding it to viewers of every true crime channel in the genre. The story of Laura Jennings became part of a larger narrative, the idea that forgotten files could still speak. A year later, the old diner where Laura worked reopened as a coffee shop. Its new owner hung a framed photograph near the counter, 2 hands holding a candle, captioned, "For those still missing." Locals said the place felt lighter somehow, as if the walls had finally exhaled. On the 40th anniversary of Laura's disappearance, Rachel Turner returned to Laurel County one last time. Snow had started early that year. The roads glistened under the porch lights. She parked outside the Jennings house, now empty, the windows dark. Through the frost-coated glass, she could see the faint outline of the room that had once been preserved like a shrine. The wallpaper had faded, the bed neatly made, the quilt folded at the foot. She stood there a while, breathing in the cold. A neighbor approached, an elderly man in a wool cap. "You the detective?" "Yes." "Funny thing," he said. "When you solved that case, the town started locking its doors again. Not because we're scared, because we remember." Turner nodded. "Memory's its own kind of safety," she said. Finally solved. Rachel Turner smiled. The world, she thought, was finally listening.